10 days and you see Tokyo, Kyoto, Nara. I don't know, I think I fell in love. Japan was calling me or something. Sake technically in Japanese means alcohol. You can only use Japanese ingredients. It's a male-dominated industry. It's a very traditional industry. I'm gonna do what the locals do. 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. Oh no, what have I done, Also, you can get hurt.
Welcome to Unpacking Japan. I'm Toby, and today we welcome Giulia. Thank you for coming.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Giulia, you just came all the way from Tokyo, where you do a lot of work related to sake.
Yes.
And today we're going to talk a lot about sake, but we're going to mostly talk about Nihonshu when we talk about sake, so that this is out of the way and at least it's clarified, right?
Thank you.
You have your own company, Gigi Sake.
Yes,
You do a lot
true.
of consulting. You're a certified sake sommelier as well. And you brew your own sake. So many questions already come to mind. But let's go back a little bit to the beginning and tell us a little bit about your background. What was it that brought you to Japan?
Right. So I'm originally from Italy. And the very first time I came to Japan, I think it was more than 10 years ago at this point, although time is flying. And the first time I came here, it was a really good chance because I had this Japanese guide taking me and a group of people and visit different cities in Japan. But before meeting this person, I never thought about coming to Japan.
Okay.
So it wasn't really like a dream travel or anything like that. I just had a good chance and I was like, okay, let's go with it and then see how it is. And it was, your classic travel to Japan is like 10 days and you see Tokyo, Kyoto, Nara, really, really standard. And I don't know, I think I fell in love. It was the craziest feeling ever. As soon as I took the train from Narita airport to the hotel, I felt like, in Japanese they say tadaima, like I'm home. And that's really what I felt. Although at that time I didn't know anything about Japan, I could not speak the language, nothing. And that I felt like Japan was calling me or something. I started to come here. I was in Italy working, saving money to come to Japan until I was like, okay, this is ridiculous. I have to go to Japan. And that's what I did. I came here to study the language for 6 months. Lots of back and forth. I'm cutting the...
Just making the story short.
The story, very long story, very short. And now it's been almost 9 years that I'm here in Japan. And I, in a way, stumbled upon sake. Because when I came here at the beginning, I didn't know anything about it. I wasn't drinking sake. I didn't know what sake was. I had no particular interest in it, which sounds very cruel to say now. And I did not have a really good image of sake either. Because in Italy, if you go to a Japanese restaurant with all the air quote possible, they bring you this very hot drink, but nobody really tells you what it is or how to drink it, and it's not particularly good. So I didn't have a really good image of sake. But so many things happened, and finally I got the chance to try sake here and the proper way with someone who told me, even though briefly, what it was. And so that was already...
Do you remember the first time you
change.
actually tried it?
The first time, it's actually a funny story. And that's actually how I got the name of my company. Was during one of my travels to Japan. I was traveling with friends, but somehow I ended up staying longer than my friends. So everybody went back to Italy and I stayed here by myself for 3 or 4 days. And it's when you travel by yourself, you always do the best experiences because you can finally talk to people and you can interact more with the locals. And I found this teeny tiny, very old ramen shop next to the place where I was staying. And the classic ramen store that only has like 6 or 7 seats.
Like a small hole in the wall,
Yes,
just like a counter and 3 stools or 5 stools.
Yes. And as I walked in, all the customers were like oji-chan, so like older gentlemen, let's say, and as well as the owner. And I don't know if I was more surprised to see them or they were more surprised to see me or something. But at that time I could not speak much. I only like words and pointing, and so I just ordered ramen. That was the only thing I knew. And then I saw that all these guys were like watching sports on the television, and they were drinking this cup of sake. And I was like, everybody's drinking. I'm going to order one as well. Yeah, sure, why not? I'm going to do what the locals do. And then I went back on the second night, and the guy was very surprised to see me because he's like, she's back. And so he was really nice to me because he was kind of like introducing me all the other dishes that you can find in a ramen. So he's like, have you ever tried gyoza? Have you ever tried memma? Have you ever tried bra, bra, bra? And he basically cooked for me a lot of stuff that I didn't order. So I think I never eaten that much in my whole life. And I ordered again this sake, and at that time I was smoking still. And so everybody's smoking inside, I'm smoking. I'm just copying what these other guys are doing.
Yeah.
And so I'm there with my gyoza, with my 1 cup, you know, the classic ozeki 1 cup you can find in a convenience store, and smoking, watching
baseball.
I think it was like F1 or something.
Formula 1, okay.
And the third night I went back, and at some point he said something like, oh, you look like an oji-san. Because I was sitting with all the other oji-san smoking, watching whatever sport was on that day, and with my ramen and with my 1 cup sake. And I told him, I was laughing about it because, yes, there's a oji-san inside of me. I don't know, I have a oji-san soul or something. But I told him somehow that I was flying away, going back to Italy. And he gave me 1 cup as a present, as like goodbye present, which I still have in Italy. I still have empty, of course, the cup. And that's my, although this, let's say the quality of the sake was not, the best sake or whatever, it's the memory. For me, that was the most important thing. And so when I decided to start my own company, I was like, what am I going to call it? What am I going to call it? And I recall this episode. And Oji-san sake doesn't really have a nice ring to it. And so I changed it to Jiji, which is another way to say Oji-san in Japanese, but sounds cuter. And so that's how it was born. But it's, a nice first memory of sake.
It's kind of a very nice first connection with it, right? Because this story stayed with you until today, and also started your interests into learning more about it. But at the time, maybe you were not really considering a career in sake, right? You were still like, oh, I like Japan, this drink is interesting. And then you said you decided to come back for studies when you had made the decision to actually come and live here.
Yeah.
When was the moment where you actually started gravitating towards a career in sake, and you're like, oh, maybe I can work in that field?
Right. So when I then moved here, I started working in the tourism industry, doing tours, and that led to food tours. And so because of the tours that I was doing, I was, of course, studying about Japanese food culture. And of course, part of the Japanese food culture is sake. And then again, at the beginning, I never thought I was going to go that deep. I was like, okay, I'm going to just try some and learn some information so I can share with my customers. And in a way, I have to say thanks to my boss at that time, because he was like, okay, it would be even better if you do have some kind of like a certification, the classic piece of paper they can say, okay, yes, I'm a foreigner, but yes, I know about sake kind of thing. And I attended the course as Kikizakeshi, which basically is the Japanese version of a sake sommelier, and which I did in Japanese, which was a very masochistic move on my
because your Japanese at the time was not yet.
I could speak Japanese at that time, but one thing is speaking, one thing is reading, especially reading really specific words, like specific terms, which you never learn in a normal Japanese conversation or
language school.
Or language school, yeah. And so that was when I received the book in Japanese about sake, and I opened it, I was like,
what have I done?
What have I done? there is the same exact exam in English. Why didn't I do it in English? I'm so stupid. But that's also because my boss at that time, he was like, oh, they have it in English if you want it. It's easier because I don't think you can do it in Japanese. And I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it in Japanese. Then I was not that happy when I received the book, but I did it. Eventually I passed it. And then from that moment, it was just me wanting to learn more, to know more. And then I think it was during COVID then that, of course, COVID changed everybody's life. But it gave me a little bit of more time to myself to understand, okay, what am I doing with all the knowledge that I have, all the knowledge. What am I doing with this knowledge and what am I doing with my career and what's going on and what's happening? And I was like, I should start my own company and doing my own tasting and experiences, but all about sake. And in the same time, so it was actually interesting because I was like, okay, I'm going to quit my job and start my own career. And I was terrified because my own company and then leaving a full-time job. And I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? What am I doing? And so I told my boss, I gave my month in advance, whatever. And as I'm going home, I'm like, I'm going to call him back and I'm going to beg him. Oh no, what have I done? All the doubts possible. As I get home, I received an email from the SSA, which is the Sake Sommelier Association in London. And they were telling me, oh, we saw your website and we want to talk to you because we're looking for a sake educator in Japan. Would you like to be our sake educator in Japan? And I was like, I think I melted. And I was like, okay, I think that was the right choice.
So when your boss kind of picked a little on you and saying, oh, you can take the test in English, it's easier. And you thought, I'm going to show it to him that I can do this. You really went the extra mile to be like, I'm going to learn this, pass the test, and quit my job to do my own sake company all the way.
Yes, I'm petty that went on. Of course, this was like years in the mix. I'm making, again, everything shorter. But that was kind of like the tangible proof that I've done something right. But then, so I took the exam as sake sommelier and then a sake educator with the SSA. But then again, I was like, so as an educator now, I can host seminars and do courses for people who wants to become a sommelier, which means, and I'm not judging other educators who have a different path or do different way. Everybody do their own thing. But I think as an educator, if I never worked in a brewery or been in a brewery and been part of the production, even just for a little bit, how am I supposed to teach others? I cannot just read a book and then tell my students because they can read a book by themselves.
So now you work with this SSA, Sake Sommelier Association, as an educator and a sommelier here in Japan. I want to get back to that exam a little bit. Okay. What exactly is this Sake Sommelier exam? What do you need to learn? How does it work? And what happens after you actually pass the exam?
Right. So the course focuses on different aspects of sake. And so usually we start with like history and culture, which I focus a lot on it probably also because it's one of my favorite parts. I tend to focus on it a lot. Of course, we talk about sake production, and then we talk about serving etiquette or like serving temperatures, vessels, and so on. And then depends, because some people who take the exam, they're really sake lovers, but then they do completely different job, and their job has nothing to do with sake, and so they really just do the course for themselves. And so we focus on that. And then I have also people that come from like the food and beverage industry that they maybe are they maybe are wine sommelier and they want to extend their knowledge to sake. Mm-hmm. And so we also talk about like the industry and how to serve it and how to make like a sake menu. So we talk about more about the business side of it. So I also try to cater, and depends on what my customers, my students, I should say, my students are looking for. Because I do group classes, but I also do it privately. And so if someone has a specific request, we can work on that with that person in private.
And now that you're officially licensed, kind of what is your role as a sake sommelier? Is it similar to a wine sommelier in a restaurant where you're going to maybe go around the table, make wine recommendations that go well with the food, but in your case it will be sake recommendations? Or do you work with to make promotion of sake internationally? What is kind of the role of a sake sommelier?
So there's a lot of different paths you can take. So you can, as you mentioned before, like wine sommelier, you can work in a restaurant or have collaboration with several restaurants. Like, for example, some people, they create sake menus or like pairing menus with different restaurants. Some people work in like import and export for some sake breweries. It really depends. There's a lot of different
paths you can go.
Yeah. There's a lot of different ways you can go. My personal path is that once I started working in a sake brewery, that's the path that I personally took.
You never looked back. You were like, oh, this is so cool. I want to keep doing this.
So, yeah. So my job is actually more practical these days in a way.
So producing sake.
Yeah. To making sake. Yeah.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because we've been talking about sake now for about 10-15 minutes-ish. And everyone knows kind of sake. Oh, it's this liquor from Japan. And some people that live here maybe more familiar, but this is sake. It's made this way. And actually it's not sake. It's called nihonshu, because sake just means liquor in Japanese. But if you had to describe and explain briefly, what is nihonshu? What is sake to someone who's maybe not so familiar with it?
Right. So as you mentioned, sake technically in Japanese means alcohol. So any alcoholic beverage can be referred to as sake. But the thing is, up until a few centuries ago, this beverage, sake or nihonshu, which is the Japanese proper term to refer to it, was the only beverage in Japan. So the Japanese would just call it sake because it was the only alcohol, right? They didn't have to give it a specific name. The word nihonshu was actually introduced way later when sake was introduced to the international community.
Oh, cool.
And so they were like, there was an international exposition, I forgot when, in Vienna. Anyways, they had to present sake internationally. And so that's when they had to give it a more, important name or something. And that's when they came up with the name Nihonshu, because it's the sake of Japan. It has a nicer ring to it. But even Japanese, in the daily life, they call it sake. But actually I noticed, if they're talking about alcohol, it's sake. But if they're talking about Nihonshu, it's osake.
Oh.
So they put the honorific O in front of it because it's kind of like it's the sake in a way. Yeah. But there's so many types of sake. It's really difficult. Like if we start talking about different kinds of sake now, it's gonna be like a one day long podcast or something. One thing for sure that we can say is that it's a fermented drink, and it's in the same category as wine and beer. And it's not a liquor. Usually it's around 15% of alcohol. Because a lot of people, even Japanese, they tend to think, oh, sake is too strong. I cannot drink sake, is too strong. And you're drinking shochu. Shochu is 25% of alcohol, if not more, most of the time. So I think you can handle sake. You can handle sake.
So sake, nihonshu, is a fermented beverage that falls in the same category of wine and beer, and it's usually around 15%.
Yes.
You said there's many, many kinds, and we could talk about it for a day.
Yes.
But what will be the fundamental ingredients of it?
So for this beverage to be called sake, has to be made with rice, water, koji, and yeast. These are the 4 ingredients that there must be in it. And then there might be a couple of extra ingredients, but these are the main ones.
And koji is? Koji
is a mold. Japanese use koji to make, I a lot of their fermented food, like from soy sauce to miso. They use it even for shochu, and of course to make sake. And it's kind of like it's the, how can I explain? It's the fungus, it's the mold that grows from rice. So we use its own mold to make sake. That makes sense.
Oh, the rice's own
Mold.
to make sake. Cool.
We use it to saccharify the rice, but it's gonna be too technical, too complicated. But
And so when there's many different ways to make it, actually, from those simple ingredients, I'm also assuming the process may change depending on what you're trying to make. Is that correct?
right, we have different process we can use, but also the ingredients. So we use rice, but actually there's a lot of varieties. Even for the yeast, there's a lot of different type of yeast. If you think about the water, depending on where we're making the sake, so where the brewery is in Japan, of course, the water source is going to be different. The soil is going to be different. The temperature, the humidity. There's so many different factors that change. And that will make that specific sake of that specific brewery very unique.
This may be a stupid question, but
There's not just such
can
thing
you
as
make
stupid.
sake then with non-Japanese rice and use like basmati rice or jasmine rice to make it?
You can use non-Japanese rice to make the beverage, but you cannot legally call it sake. So
Okay.
in Japan, you can only use Japanese ingredients. But then, so now we have sake breweries overseas, and some of them, they use sake imported from Japan, and some of them, they use local rice. And you can call it French sake, German sake, Italian sake, whatever, but you cannot call it Japanese sake. So it's all about the law.
There are some regulations as to what falls into each category.
Yes.
And what was it for you? When you went to the brewery for the first time, that you were like, this is what I want to be doing?
Yeah. Oh, I was scared. So it was 4 seasons ago. And I was talking about this with a friend of mine who lives in Shimane, in Izumo. And I was like, oh, I'm an educator now. It's really hard as a foreigner and as a woman to go in a brewery and work in a brewery. But I would love to, even just for, like a 1 week experience kind of thing. And I was kind of, doshio, what am I going to do? And maybe I can try this, I can try that. And again, I don't know, there's a little bit of good luck once in a while. This friend of mine's husband just started working for Itakura Shuzo as a part-time. And he's like, okay, I just started. How can I say, I have a good relationship with the people in the brewery. Maybe I can ask them if you can come here and you can just kind of like be with me. And we can, just for a few weeks maybe. And I was like, yes, please do it. And they said yes. And that's when I went to Izumo for the first time. And I was really, really almost scared because it's a male-dominated industry. It's a very traditional industry. And it's not Tokyo, it's not Osaka, it's not a big city. It's a very small, how can I say, countryside place. And I was like, I don't know if they're going to accept me or what's going to happen. I don't know. I had all my doubts. And they couldn't have been more lovely. Everybody has been super, super nice from the beginning. At least at the beginning, everything was amazing. Everybody at the beginning, they were kind of like looking at me like if I was some kind of like a weird creature. Also because I think they thought I could not speak Japanese, which at that 4 years ago I could speak Japanese. And I spent a few weeks alongside with the team, helping them, trying not to make too many mistakes with sake production, and I decided to go back the year after. I think they were very surprised to hear my phone call the year after saying, "I'm here. You remember
I'm at the train station."
You remember me? I was there last year. I'm coming. Is that okay? And they were very surprised. So they're like, okay, we call you back. But then they were like, okay, you can come. And it was at the beginning. It was supposed to be for a short time, but then someone else in the brewery quit, so I had to stay there longer. And so the first time we actually got in touch, I think I was still in Shimane. It was my 4th season with them. I went back to Tokyo in March. So it's been 4 seasons now.
Can you explain what is a sake brewing season? How long does it typically last? And maybe from there, explain to us, what is a typical day at a sake brewery?
Right. So it's a seasonal job. Most of the sake breweries, they only work in the coldest part of the year because it's best suited for sake making. And so typically the sake season goes from October to March/April, depending on the brewery. Sake brewing is an open tank fermentation. As you know, Japanese summers are very hot and humid, which could be a huge problem for anything that's fermenting, right? And that's why we brew in winter. The typical day. So the brewery I work for in Shimane, Itakura Shuzo, we do 5 to 5. So 5 a.m. to 5 p.m.
That's an early start.
That's an early start, yeah. I kind of got used to it at some point. Every day it's, how can I say, part of the day it's really similar every day, because every day the first thing we do, we start working with koji, and we wash rice every day, we steam rice every day. Depending on where in the season, there's a lot of things happening, but it's a very, I don't know, from the outside, it's very romanticized kind of job, because it's like most of the kurabito or the sake brewers, they live in the brewery their whole life. They are 6 months living all together in the brewery. They work together, they eat together, and everything happens there. It's, I don't know, sounds very romantic. It's very traditional, and in a way it is, but it's also a very physical job. And it was funny my first season, because I was like, I've never done a physical job in my life. I'm gonna start with sake making. Again, not a very smart thing. But like any other physical job or activity, you start that you cannot do it, and then little by little you become stronger and you can do it. So that's not the issue. The 12 hours a day, every day.
And walking around, stirring the koji, checking things, carrying things around, very physical, very tiring.
It's very, how can I say, everybody's always focused on how the job is physical. That's why it's a man's job. That's why you don't see as many women in the industry. And I don't really think it's the problem. It's more the psychological strength, the mental strength that you have to have instead of the physical strength, because you have to be focused at all times. Because if you there's no time to make a mistake. Because if you make a mistake, everything is going to get delayed and it's going to be a problem. But also you can get hurt, because so many things can happen. I strained my back. See this is really cute pink I have on my arm. I burned myself with boiling hot water, and all my skin came off. Yes, you're welcome for the image. If you get distracted for a second, anything can happen. It's a very, again, physical job, but we don't wear helmets. We don't wear any kind of protection. So a lot of things can happen. We carry a lot of weight all the time. So that's, again, you don't have time to rethink or something. And if you make a mistake, it could cause a problem to the whole process altogether.
Yeah, you could ruin a batch of sake, right?
Yes.
But if everything goes well, you go through the season and you produce. What's it like when you get to the end of the season and you pour that last bottle and then it's closed for the next 6 months?
It's okay. So the season in terms of production is closed in March and April, but then you still have a lot of tanks. They're still fermenting. They're still bottling. There's still a lot of other process that's happening. So the brewery itself, it's going on all year round. Just production stops, but the last days is really a relief, and especially once you're drinking, when you're like, how can I say, in the middle of the season, and you can finally taste the first batches, and you're at dinner all together and drinking the sake that you all together made, that's priceless. Even more though, and that's a little bit of ego, when you go to a local izakaya and nobody knows who you are and you just mind your own business, and the people sitting next to you order sake you made, and you hear them saying, "Oh, this is delicious," and you're like, "Yes."
That's every brewer's dream.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really nice.
So you go there now every year for the brewing season,
Yes.
Itakura Shuzo. But you also said in 2020 you started your company, Jiji Sake.
Yes.
So what do you do there now with this company that you've established for already 4 years?
So basically, I work as a freelance. So I work with in winter. I work with this brewery. When I'm, let's say, off season, I organize events. I go organize courses. I haven't done it just because of there's not time enough. I used to host dinner events. I was doing Italian cuisine with a Japanese sake and doing like a pairing event. It was really, really fun. I was doing everything myself. So I'm cooking the food, I'm serving the sake. There's a lot of job, but it's really, really fun. And but then last autumn, I think. Yes, last autumn, I also started working for another sake brewery in Asakusa. It's a craft sake brewery in Asakusa, and they brew all year round.
Cool.
So basically now I'm brewing sake, and once in a while doing seminars and courses and stuff. So I'm going on the brewing side more and more. It's kind of like
Becoming your main focus.
Yes.
But once in a while, you still have clients coming over for dinner and you pair the sake. I want to understand this a little bit more.
Okay.
Sake, very complex. You said many, many different kinds. And similar to wine, probably. This wine goes well with fish. This wine goes well with meat. This wine goes well with, I don't know, salad. How is it with sake? What makes a sake go better with either kind of ingredients?
Right. The amazing thing about sake is that the idea of sake and food pairing is a very new thing. So the main difference with the wine world, there's a lot of more rules, and it's a little bit more, squared. And with sake, it's a very new topic, and so there's a lot more to experiment with. But also sake has very low acidity compared to wine, but a higher umami, which means it's actually easier to pair sake with food than wine.
Oh.
It's actually easier to, even for people who don't know much about sake, it's easier for them to pick up a bottle because, I don't know, they like the label or someone recommended
That's how I buy sake. I like the label, I get this one.
It's a way. Why not? I mean, I sometimes do it because they have sometimes these very catchy labels, and I'm like, okay,
Right.
I never tried this sake. Let's go with this one. There's like Cute Cats Brewing sake on the label. That's the sake I'm having tonight. Sometimes it's a hit, sometimes it's a miss. But it's easier to pick up the sake and enjoy with your meal. Also because you can tweak sake. Like if you don't like it cold, you can try and change the temperature and have it a room temperature or have it warm. You can still do something with it. If you buy the, again, wrong bottle of wine, if it doesn't match the food, either you change the menu or you change the wine. It's a little bit, it's really, really different, I think.
So sake, you said, is easier to pair.
I
but
think so.
Let's say, like myself, I don't know that much about it, and I pick things based on whether or not I like the label. If I want to change that and be a bit more conscious about
Right.
sake, if I look at wine, for example, I may have a type of grape that I like, Sauvignon Blanc, and
Right,
maybe
right,
a type, origin country that I prefer. How can I know about sake, which bottle I'm buying, and what I could possibly expect when I buy it?
Right. I have to say, sake labels in general are not helping because there's not many information on the labels, not even for Japanese.
Okay.
Because even if there's, let's say, category written on the label, if you don't know what that category means, it's like there's nothing written on the label. One thing that can help, and that's something that everybody can see, whether you speak Japanese or not, is the polishing ratio on the label, which is a number, so you're good. And it's usually written on the back label. And the polishing ratio can help you understand if that sake is going to be on the lighter side or on the richer side, which is the beginning.
So you're talking about the ratio at which the rice is being polished.
Yes, exactly. Let's say the smaller the grain gets, so the smaller the number. So if you have like a 50% or 40%, is going to be on the lighter, more like delicate side. If you have 70, 80, 90%, it's going to be bolder.
Okay.
So it's a start.
It's a rule of thumb, like a base kind of indication.
Yeah. Of course, there's so many things, so many variables. Also depends on regionality, depends on the category. But having the numbers there can be already a little bit of a help, I think.
So the polishing ratio also indicates, I believe, the type of sake it is, right? You have Junmai and...
Yes.
Could you explain a little bit how the categorization works?
Right. Okay, let's get into it. Okay. So you have two main big categories, like two main big families. One is the Junmai one and the non-Junmai. So Junmai literally means pure rice. So that sake was only made with rice, koji, yeast, and water. That's it. And if it's a non-Junmai, it's because there's distilled alcohol added to the mix.
Okay.
And so you can already choose. It's either if you see the word Junmai on the label, of course, if it's gonna be in Junmai. When it's a non-Junmai, usually just don't see the word Junmai on the label. The difference, again, rule of thumb between Junmai and non-Junmai is that most likely a Junmai kind of sake is going to have a better umami, whilst a non-Junmai is going to be a little bit more elegant. And then within these two big families, depending on the polishing ratio, you have different categories. And so you have Junmai Daiginjo, which is polished up to 50%. Then Junmai Ginjo is polished up to 60%. And if it's just Junmai, it means that we don't necessarily know the polishing ratio. So it could be anything. Lots of time is around 70%, but it's an unwritten rule.
Mm-hmm.
And so for the non-Junmai family, you have the same name. So you have Daiginjo again, but of course without the Junmai.
Okay.
And then you have Ginjo and then Honjozo, which is polished up to 70%. And then Futsusho, which is another mystery because, again, we don't necessarily know the polishing ratio for that one too.
So two big categories,
Yes.
and then different levels of polishing,
Yes.
basically. And you said Junmai is kind of the basic ingredients and only those, and
Yes.
maybe a more traditional taste, but you use the word elegant for the others.
Yes.
Does it mean that the non-Junmai is maybe more rich, maybe more surprising at times, where you don't expect certain flavors to be in sake and you find them there?
It's really difficult to speak in such a big categories. The thing with non-Junmai, because there's distilled alcohol added to the mix, is going to bring out the aromatics a lot. And so you can feel the aromatics better. But on the other side, because there's distilled alcohol added, it's going to make it a little bit sturdier. So it's going to be easier for that sake to be enjoyed at room temperature or warm. Maybe Junmai sake, especially a Junmai Daiginjo or Junmai Ginjo, not all of them taste at their best when they are warm. So you can enjoy better when they're chilled.
So is this where this kind of misconception perhaps comes, that only bad sake is to be served warm?
I don't know what that rumor started, but it's so sad because it's not true. It actually, up until recent, like modern times, sake was only consumed warm. Room temperature at best. Sake has been consumed warm since day one. Only recently, and we'd have to say also thank you to the influence of wine, that we are serving sake also chilled. But sake has been served warm forever in Japan. I don't know. Okay, I cannot speak for restaurants or sake bars overseas. Here in Japan, that's not the reason.
Okay.
That's not the reason why we do that.
So let's go back to our supermarket, and now we look at the
Yes.
label, and we can
Yes.
see that on the bottle it either says Junmai or it doesn't say Junmai, and we
Yes.
can also see the polishing ratio in most cases. And if it's not really there, then probably we know it's in the kind of less polished categories. And based on that, we can get an idea a little bit of if it's a lighter one or richer one.
Yes.
What about regionalities? Are there big differences between sake produced in Hokkaido and in Kyushu, for example?
Of course, regionality plays a role to it because sake is now produced everywhere in Japan. And of course, if you just think of the climate throughout Japan, you go from like North Hokkaido to Kyushu, or you think of like Okinawa, which is basically a tropical island. Of course, the soil is different, the water is different, the weather, the food culture, everything is different. So of course, you're going to have different kind of sake. Usually, it's a very broad thing. Sake that comes from like northeast tends to be lighter and a bit drier, and sake that comes from like southwest tend to be a bit richer, a bit bolder.
But not always.
But it's not always. It's good. Usually, typically. One thing I can say, a lot of sake that comes from, for example, like Kyoto, especially Fushimi, tends to be very, on the sweet side, very mild, very light, for example, that we know for a fact because of the water there. But then technically, even within the same region, you can find a lot of differences.
So it's a bit less than, for example, wine, where, for example, if the grapes are produced in a volcanic area, the wine will have a tendency to be more this type of wine, as opposed to a wine that is maybe a little bit at higher altitude. It's more difficult to know with sake because there's too many variants in the...
There's too many variants, and also really depends on what that specific brewery wants to achieve. So we can talk about regionality, but it's not going to be like black or white kind of answer. Not like as you mentioned in wine, where we have regionality, we have also terroir, kind of, which I cannot pronounce correctly, sorry.
It's difficult. Terroir. It's the R kind of rolls at the back.
That one, yes.
That one.
So we can, especially at the beginning, if we don't know sake that much, of course, we can try to understand sake through wine. I personally don't like it too much, but I understand it. So especially with my students at the very beginning of the course, we have a moment where we try to put them together so they can understand better sake, and then at some point you have to abandon wine completely and just think of sake as sake. Because when you learn wine, you don't learn wine and you put a parallel with another drink, you just learn wine. Then that's it. And so I would like for my students, and in general for everybody, if possible, at some point just think of sake as sake.
So we have a bottle of sake. We picked one at the supermarket and we go back home.
You're
and
asking
now,
for yourself, right?
Yeah. And then I want to enjoy this. And
Okay.
now, up until now, I would buy a bottle, and because I like the label, and then I can either say I like it or I don't like it. And maybe fundamentally that's how you decide whether a sake is good for you or not. But if I want to try to understand it a little bit more, what should I pay attention to when I actually drink it? Is there a specific way to drink and enjoy sake so that you get the most out of it?
So if you want to do a little bit more, if you really want to know a little bit more about your sake, the best way, let's say you went to a sake shop, you went to supermarket, you got your bottle, you're home. The best thing will be to try it, and let's say close to room temperature, so you can actually understand its personality. And then you can decide, okay, actually I think this is going to be better if I chill it, or if I keep it like this, or if I warm it up. And you can understand it depending, for example, on its depth. Like if you drink it and if you see that it has a lot of layers, has a long tail, has a rich body, it's maybe changing because at the beginning it's more floral and you get some other aromatics in it. So it has a story to it. You're going to choose for one direction. If it's a very light one, a very delicate one, you're going to choose on the other way. And so that's usually the more complex sake is, the more it's going to be it's going to adapt to different temperatures and different food pairings as well. If it's a very light, not particularly layered, very delicate type of sake, it's going to be better enjoyed chilled with some aromatic type of food, for example.
So usually you want to start with having your bottle at room temperature and have a first try. And then depending on what you feel there, you either want to maybe warm it up or you want to cool it down.
Yes, I think it's the best way. Once, especially now it's getting warmer and warmer outside, of course, once you open the bottle, for most sake, the best thing will be just to keep it in the fridge, just because, again, the humidity of Japan is is going up every day. And once you open a bottle, I would say the best thing would be to consume it within a month. Not because it's going to necessarily go bad, but it's, of course, the more it stays on a shelf, the more it's going to change.
Like the story I was telling you just before we started recording about me buying this, unbeknownst to me, 1.8 liter giant bottle of sake just for myself because my wife doesn't drink too much sake. And it took me a year to go through, and the flavor really, really changed up until the point where the last few glasses were not that enjoyable anymore.
Right. Well, you can call that your own personal experiment. And that's actually something you can actively do. I'm not saying to use the whole bottle. You can just leave just a little bit and leave it there for a longer time just to see how it's changing and how long it takes for that sake to go bad. I like this kind of experiments. So I always do it.
Now, with how complex this drink is, what I'm curious about is if we go back to the brewing process, which is what you like the most, how can you actually plan for a specific flavor? Can you know before you actually pour the bottle how your sake is going to taste? Can you calculate and actively influence the outcome of the sake? Or do you sometimes produce something for a while and then you get a bottle like, this is not what we wanted to produce?
And that is the work of the toji, or the master brewer will be like the equivalent of an enologue in the wine world. So he is the one that decides how the workers are going to work on that specific rice, on that specific batch, so that he has a vision of what the sake is going to be. And of course, an experienced toji would be like an experienced toji is able to predict to a very like high percentage of what the final outcome is going to be. But we're talking about like, how can I say, enzymes that are alive. And so there's just so much that you can control. What you can do as a sake brewer, you enable the fermentation and the process, and you're trying to make into what you want. But the final result, of course, it's very difficult to achieve exactly that specific flavor. And that is the skill of the toji, to be able to make every year the same sake. And of course, every year there's going to be slight differences, even if you are the most skilled toji.
I know we just talked about not comparing as wine, but
let's compare it to wine.
Yes, because you just said that the toji will try every year to make the same sake.
Yes.
Whereas in wine, I feel like it's very common to put the year on the bottle, and then people will talk about, oh, this year was like this and it was great, and maybe other years were maybe not so good.
Right.
Also because climate affects things, or because the wine ages in the bottle, and then I don't, as far as I know, maybe I'm mistaken here, but there's less of a talk of the wine needs to be the same every year, but rather this is the wine produced here this year.
Right, and you get the 1992 of that wine, and it's amazing, and it's going to be super expensive, and it's going to be like a collection wine or vintage, and 1993 is vinegar or something. The same thing doesn't really happen in the sake world, because we are talking about two completely different type of ingredients. Grapes and rice are two completely different things. And although rice is also affected by the weather condition, it's not going to be affected as much as the grapes.
Okay.
So even if, let's say, last year the weather condition was at the best, we can still make good sake out of it. It's going to be more complicated. And last year we didn't have, last summer was super, super hot.
Very hot.
And that created a lot of problems for agriculture in general, and especially for rice. And so actually it has been a very difficult season because the rice was completely different, and every day we were just like, kind of like, oh my God, all kind of rice that we use, it was completely different. It was cracking too fast, or it was not absorbing water as fast, and a lot of we had to rearrange the whole process. So it was very complicated, but we still achieved a sake that it's as close as possible to last year's production.
So in that situation, the toji is the one who analyzes the flavors, analyzes the enzymes he can taste, and will direct everyone to follow. And then you do the lifting and the heavy work with everyone else.
Yes,
at
so him,
brewery.
and then of course, depending, so each part of the process, there's going to be a person in charge. And so that person in charge is going to be checking on, so when we wash rice every day, depending on the temperature of the water, the humidity, the temperature outside, the kind of rice, the polishing ratio, and so and so and so and so. He will examine the rice on that day, and he will decide that rice has to be washed for this many seconds, and then soak in water for this many minutes, and this way and that way. So there's a lot of adjusting that has to be done every day. So yes.
You've been doing
Very
this for
komakai.
very komakai, very detailed.
Very detail oriented.
You've done this for 4 seasons now, and getting more and more into it. Now also helping in Asakusa, where they do it all year long. So how do they manage to do it through the hot and humid summer there?
The good thing about the craft sake brewery in Asakusa is that it's a small brewery, and we have to keep the air conditioning on at all times, of course. But it's a small brewery.
So it's a controlled environment.
It's a controlled environment, which if you have a big brewery, unless you are a very famous one, so you have a lot of money, like Gekkeikan, these big brands, of course, they have to keep the air conditioning on at all times. Yeah, you can do it. But like small family business or like small breweries, of course, cannot afford to brew all year round.
It's a tough job. You describe the work at the brewery to be very physical labor, requiring a lot of mental work as well to keep going and keep motivating. But it's also super fascinating from what you've shared with us. What is it that keeps you into this brewing and that makes you want to kind of get more and more into that?
That's the most difficult question. I don't know. It's a crazy job. I'm always telling you have to be a bit bonkers to do this job, because you spend your like months and months with these people, because it's 12 hours per day every day. But then part of the team sleeps in the brewery, which means you eat together. You see them more than you see your own family. They become your family. And so you're in the same, constantly next to each other. And of course, senpai kohai relationship is very strong.
So based on seniority level. Yeah.
Yes. So for example, I'm the youngest one, and I'm the one that got to the brewery. It's like the last one and going into the brewery. So I was always the last one to taking a bath at the end of the day, for example. And all these kind of things, you always have to wait from like the senior to the
most junior.
One. The good thing though is that nobody ever said a word or made a problem that I'm a foreigner. Although at the beginning they were like, "Can she speak Japanese?" And then realized I can't speak Japanese, so
everything's good.
Everything's good. Problem is they started talking to me in Izumoben, which is the local dialect, and I was kind of like, they don't teach you that in Japanese school, so I don't know what that is, but sometimes I'm just like, hi, and then I'm doing exactly opposite of what they ask me because I don't understand the dialect. But after 4 years, I got the gist of it, of course. And nobody never made a problem about the fact that I'm a woman, which I was surprised because I was like, I'm surrounded by men. And it's not a common job for a woman. And you hear about stories about the industry and blah, blah, and nobody ever said a word. They understood that I was there for real. Like I was there to put in the work. I wasn't there to, and as a tourist or something. And so nobody ever said nothing. So that probably helped a lot. The fact that I wanted to go back.
And now there's something inside you that's lit on, and you just want to kind of keep digging and keep seeing how far you can push the brewing process.
You know, the thing is, the more I work in sake, the more I make sake, the more I understand how much I don't know about it. And that makes me, I think that makes me want to go back. I don't know.
We talked a lot about the production process and sake itself a little bit. I want to go on to talk a little bit about the industry.
Okay.
And the first thing that comes to mind is during COVID, the Japanese government followed up on their Go-To Travel campaign, which was this kind of a push for domestic tourism when the borders were closed. They followed that up with a campaign, I think the name was Go-To Drink. And this was very short-lived. And they kind of had this campaign to push young people to go drink alcohol. Yes. Which I was very surprised because as a European, that would not be allowed for the government to push people to go drink.
Yeah, but that sounds very weird.
The reasoning was, when I read a few articles about this, it seems that data is showing younger people are less and less interested in sake. And we started our conversation with you saying it's a very traditional industry. And so those older, centuries-old family businesses are struggling with their sales a little bit. Why are young people not so interested in maybe what is happening in the industry? Is there change happening?
Yeah, it's very sad in a way because younger generations are more into shochu, they're more into beer and
highball. Don't forget highball.
Highball, wine, everything but sake. And I think it's because sake is what my grandpa drinks. It's not particularly cool or anything. I don't know. And then again, a lot of even Japanese people, they have this, but I was talking to this Japanese guy yesterday and he was like, oh no, I drink shochu because sake is too strong. And I'm like, no, it's the opposite. It's just that you're used to shochu, but technically sake is way lighter. And like, if you think about alcohol percentage, but the good thing is that finally the sake industry is starting to wake up and starting to approach younger generations by having sake that has lower alcohol content, so like 10% or below 10%.
Wow.
They're making sparkling sake, fruity sake. Now we have craft sake, like the brewery I work for in Asakusa. We work a lot with fruits and spices. We have, for example, like a peach doburoku, which is kind of like the I don't want to go into much to it, but basically doburoku is the unpressed version of sake, to put in a very simple way. So it's like the thick, very cloudy kind of drink, and we make it like a peach version. We just released like a mango and chili version, for example. So it's something a little bit more fun and young. So a lot of sake breweries, they're really trying to appeal to a lot of different kind of customers, and especially younger customers too. But sake consumption is going down in Japan. So good thing is exports are going up.
So it's balancing out a little bit?
Not yet, but it's definitely going to be. And there's more and more brewers opening overseas, and more foreigners who are falling in love with sake or enjoying sake. So we hope that also Japanese will go back and look at their own sake and say like, we're actually making something really good. Let's drink more sake.
So it seems like it's a cycle of the perception where now the younger generation is perceiving this as an old man's drink, the oji-san sake.
Jesus.
And the sake industry is not trying to kind of rebrand itself a little bit. And some breweries, maybe like the craft brewery, make some very original drinks. But maybe the how can I say, the more traditional companies will see this as, this is not sake, this is not how you make
Absolutely not. That's not sake. Plus, there's another problem in the industry is almost nobody wants to work in sake breweries anymore because it is a very physical job. The senpai kohai relationship is very strict because it's a very traditional environment, and so I hear stories every day of people they start working in the brewery because they have this romantic vision of it, and they literally run away because the pressure is too much, because it's long hours, not much money. It's not like it's not like such a well-paid job, and it's very strict conditions. And there's a word that is getting more and more, I hear more and more in Japan, which is pawahara, and power harassment, right? And that's definitely a reality of a lot of breweries. So a lot of younger generations, they're like, for the same pay, I can just work in a convenience store, or do like a regular job in a
air-conditioned room.
In an air-conditioned room, and nobody, hopefully, is yelling at me, and I don't have to crack my back or something. So there's a lot of problems in the industry for sure.
So not only the image of the drink, but also the image of kind of working in that industry.
Yeah, it's a very strict place to work with.
What are I liked what you mentioned about the craft brewery in Asakusa. It seems that it's trying to innovate and kind of do something new and different. What are some of the other trends you see in the industry at the moment?
It could be, the process that's different, the fact that we're adding extra ingredients to make it lighter, to make it fresher. As I mentioned before, sparkling sake, the fact that a lot of smaller reality also employ more women. This wasn't decided, it just happened to be, but now it's called, the brewery in Asakusa is called Konohanano. We're only women. The whole team, we're all women. And it just happened. And then we just look at each other and we're like, wait a second. This is supposed to be a men's world. What's happening? Which is really cool, actually. There's a lot of also collaborations between these smaller realities to create more products and more awareness about this. It's the new generation who's trying to make something different.
The young generation of people that are passionate about this are trying to make a change and trying to disrupt a little bit, not to fundamentally change it, but to experiment, try something new.
Yeah, so there's kind of like two kinds of market. You have the very traditional one and then a very modern one. So it's kind of like it's getting into two different directions in a way, which I think they're both necessary. There's a lot of things happening also with a lot of like big international names that also start working in sake. Like, for example, people coming from the wine world also making their own sake. There's a lot of different collaborations. Some of them
some of them good, some of them
good, some of them but I think we are this is becoming a big topic in the sake industry. I think we are in a point where you cannot be too picky about all this type of collaborations. We have to have the conversation going about sake, and because we really need people to consume more sake, which again, I sound like that Japanese government, you drink sake. It's the culture behind it. It's not really it's not just the business, it's the culture. It's 2,000 years culture that it's in some part of Japan, it's almost disappearing because a lot of sake breweries are closing down because there's, family business and they cannot keep up with the competition because, of course, it's buying all the materials and making sake. It's also very, very expensive. But although all the jobs that's behind the bottle, the price of sake is very cheap. I believe in Japan, if I think of what all my colleagues have to endure every day, that sake is very cheap. And so that's also another issue that I feel in the industry.
Where, again, comparing is wine, you'd see wine bottles priced higher and higher because it's from specific places. And you do see some expensive sake, but generally speaking, when you go to the supermarket or to the liquor store, you find a lot of sake that is, in the range of 1,000 to 2,000 yen. Yeah.
Right. I feel these people is, especially the thing that I think I know you didn't ask me for this, but one thing that should change about the industry is give more relevance to the people that put in their effort and they're working breweries every day, because their dedication is and their passion is amazing, and they never get any kind of recognition, and they should get more for sure.
So whenever I will enjoy my next bottle of sake, I should kind of toast to the people that made it, right?
Because aside from like those huge breweries that of course have machineries, because if you're producing tons and tons of sake per year, of course you have to use machineries. Most of that sake is handmade. Most of the process is still in my hands. So if you can once in a while, that would be nice.
What is a way for people that are kind of interested after hearing all of this to find more information? Where can they go to get a better understanding of sake, to find information about where the sake they buy is from? I'm thinking that maybe a lot of those more traditional old family businesses don't necessarily have a website, or the website is not in English for people that are not able to speak Japanese. Where can people find information to actually learn more about what they're buying and who's behind it, and who are those people that put so much sweat and tears into the bottle?
Right. Well, definitely, if you're interested, you can go and visit breweries. A lot of them, they do host tours, and they have informations in English as well. So that could be one thing. It's always fun to go and visit the brewery, because you can see like the behind the scenes of the production. There's actually an information center in Toranomon, and they have plenty of informations in English. They also have always like small tastings that you can do. So that's definitely something super easy, because, I'm speaking like if I was in Tokyo.
Toranomon in
if
Tokyo.
you are in Tokyo, I forgot that I traveled all the way to Osaka. Right. If you're in Tokyo, there's the JSS Information Center, for example, which again is in English, and they have all sorts of information. But luckily nowadays we have more and more information in English too. There's a lot of books about sake as well. So we also have sake podcasts. No.
Currently on pause, right?
Currently on pause. Now there's a lot of like events, especially as it gets to summer, of course. There's more and more matsuri and festivals where you can enjoy sake, and all sake breweries, especially when they're enjoying these kind of like festivals, they have their pamphlets out. More of them, they're putting out the information in English as well. So there's always a way to try. And of course, if people who are in Japan speaks a little bit of Japanese, even going to your local izakaya and ask and chat with the staff there, or going to a sake store, a lot of the staff might actually know a little bit about the sake. So that could be a begin. That's how I started, just by asking questions to everybody.
So asking a lot of questions, going to some visitor centers, but you also said visiting some breweries.
Yes.
Now you used to originally work as a tour guide in Japan. So
Yes.
if now I'm thinking about people that are into sake and coming to Japan, what will be must visit places? What are some sake related places in Japan, whether they are breweries or others that people should go stop and visit?
Where to start? Because as I mentioned, there's like sake breweries everywhere in Japan, and especially in places like in big cities like Kyoto, which is one of the most famous places in Japan, and also one of the most famous spots for sake. There's plenty of breweries. They also have English speakers stuff in the store, for example. That could be one thing. There's a lot of like sake tours as well.
Okay.
So you can visit different breweries in a specific kind of area. There's agencies that also like privates. They also host sake tours. I'm actually, I don't know if I can say this, but I'm actually joining a tour tomorrow. A friend of mine, he's also sake brewer. We are off season, and so he started doing his own tours.
Cool.
In Kobe, in Hyogo area, and so I'm gonna join his tour. I'm so excited. So there's more and more services available in English too, for sure.
So information is out there. If people look for it, they will find it. If not, they can find you.
They can find me, and
ask you questions.
I can. I also have another good friend in in Kyoto. She does also sake tours and sake dinners. So if the internet is too wide, of course, if someone wants to contact me, I can then direct them to either to myself or to some of my friends.
You got into sake a few years ago, started brewing 4 seasons ago, are getting more and more into it, doing craft brewing, traditional brewing. I don't know if I can say this, but overseas brewing as well.
Yes, you can say it, yes.
In Singapore.
Almost forgot.
Opening a brewery in Singapore.
Yes.
What's next for you? What do you want to be doing in the next few years?
That's a good question. I found a couple of years ago, I was thinking, that might sound very cocky to say it, but I'm going to say it anyways. I'm probably one of the few sake educators that are on both sides. Because usually people who brew sake, they brew sake. And people who are educators. I do both. And so I was like, there could be also, from a business point of view, there could be also my selling point, because I do both. But the more I brew, the more I want to brew. So I don't know if I'm going to be just doing that 100%, or at some point I had a dream of having my own place and doing all events there and doing collaborations with, that's my other dream. It's over there, having this place where I can actually have regular, like just customers coming in and drink sake and order sake like a bar, but also hosting art events. So having collaboration with artists. I don't know, let's say you're a painter, you want to show off your paintings. So you can use my space as a gallery. People come in, have a sip, enjoy your paintings or your pictures or your music, whatever. And so having this kind of like almost different evening every night or something, that's kind of like.
And then in the back room, you brew your own sake.
And anyway, I'm like stirring my own sake.
So then it's not a 12-hour day, it's a 20-hour day, right?
Yes, I mean, just in my place. I don't know. That's there. Maybe when I'm older, I'm gonna do that.
But for now, just more brewing.
For now, definitely more. I was actually so excited because my family came to visit last week. So they left last week, and they were here in Japan for 10 days. It was my first time for my dad, so I took him around, and it was amazing. But that means that I had to stop what I was doing of course, to be with my family, which of course no complaints. But then I was like,
I want to go back. The itch is there to brew more sake.
Yeah. So the other day I went back, and I was we were washing rice, and I was like, So I'm home, kind of
It's
thing.
great to have that feeling.
Yeah, yeah.
Julia, we covered a lot of topics.
Yes.
Your journey to Japan, your journey into sake.
Yes.
We talked a lot about sake brewing, a little bit the industry, the challenges, the developments, the changes. Is there something in particular that we haven't covered that maybe you would like to share? Whether something about sake, something people should know that maybe I forgot to ask about, that you're like, oh, people should know about this.
Wow.
Or did we cover the big things, and for the rest, they should just reach out?
I think we covered a lot. Really, just when you drink sake, just think of all the hard work that was in the bottle. There's at this point in the game, there's no such thing as a bad sake. So if something is wrong with that bottle, most likely it's because it's especially if it's overseas, it was maybe not handled properly, or it's, I don't know, something happened during the
They
trip.
left it in the sun for 30 hours.
Yeah, something like that. So at this point in the game, there's really not such thing as a bad sake. It could be just a personal preference. But one thing you can say for sure that's a lot of passion and dedication into it, and that's something to not always take for granted. It's nice to sometimes remember the people behind that, because I've seen so many amazing people, and none of them have any like zero ego, or like they don't want to be talked about or something. They're like, oh, this is just my job. Like if it's like a normal thing, and it's not. Cause you can really see the passion of these people. So just that.
Thank you. I think this is something great to keep in mind. So thank you for coming all the way from Tokyo to share your story, share your passion,
Of course.
and your knowledge. It was very interesting for me. And now I want to learn more too.
Yeah.
So I might open up that sake book I have at home and read a little bit more tonight.
Yeah, if you have any question, of course, you can always ask me. But thank you so much for having me. It was fun. I hope I didn't talk too much.
Not at all. We could have talked plenty more, but I have a feeling the batteries are slowly running out. So thank you everyone for listening and watching. This was Unpacking Japan, and we'll be back next week. Bye.
Bye.
Are you looking for another podcast episode to listen to next? If you like the one you just listened to, I'm sure you'll also enjoy the one that I've selected and linked in the description down below. Go check it out.